All right, we'll give that 1 second. Welcome. Seeing a couple more people coming in. And looks like it's slow. That's what it looks like. All right, we'll give it one more second. And looks like we're having some more technical difficulties here. Give it one more second, and if it doesn't go through, oh, there we go. Okay, excellent. All right, let me mute that. All right, so it is episode 74. I've been doing this now 74 weeks, and many times I've mentioned many labs. A long time ago, I did a lecture where I actually spoke about certain lab tests that I think that you should actually get. And I've certainly repeated them over the weeks. And tonight, one of the goals that I have is for you to really feel like you can be comfortable either ordering these tests yourself, talking about them somewhat. I can't go through all the details of all these tests. In fact, really, as I said, my goal for tonight is really for you to have a general understanding of certain blood tests that are going to be important for optimizing your health. Now, I'm not going to talk about the general blood tests that your doctor should be getting. I'm assuming that you're getting your routine labs, which include, a general blood count and general chemistry and your cholesterol, maybe your liver enzymes. We're not necessarily going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about are some things that your doctor may not order. We'll also be talking about labs where the reference ranges that your doctor is going to be recommending might not actually be optimal for your overall health. That is actually something that is a strong consideration for you. In other words, your doctor might go in and look at your labs. And to be honest, most doctors are going to just look at the reference ranges. And if you're in the reference range, then they're going to say, your labs are normal. By the end of tonight, my goal, another one of my goals, is for you to really understand deeply that the optimal levels for optimal health are not necessarily going to fall in the reference ranges. I've certainly spoken about in the past about how there is this idea that if you are pre-diabetic, that there's not anything going on. That's for some, it's almost like magical thinking where somehow you're pre-diabetic and then your labs change just a little bit, and then you can be classified as diabetic. And then all of a sudden, all of the side effects of diabetes happen. Well, that's not what happens. In fact, when you're pre-diabetic, you're getting a lot of damage to your body. We'll talk a little bit about that. And therefore, being given the diagnosis, and I know that I've had many patients who they come in and they say, I'm not seeing them for that. And they come in and they say, well, and they might have a condition that I'm seeing them for that might be made worse with diabetes. For example, I sometimes see people with recurrent yeast and skin infections. That is often a sign of prediabetes or diabetes. And when I ask them, has your doctor ever told you you have prediabetes or diabetes? A lot of times I'll get the response, oh yeah, I have prediabetes, not diabetes yet. And generally speaking, the majority of patients actually feel like that is not something to be concerned about. But in the lecture that we did many weeks ago, where we spoke about prediabetes in detail, you have to understand that the damage of diabetes starts with prediabetes. And therefore, understanding these reference ranges and how to optimize them is going to be important for your overall health. And for this, unfortunately, you need to be in control of that. You need to know that that prediabetes is an issue, and you need to know what your hemoglobin A1C is at an optimal level, not the reference range necessarily. And so this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So let me share my screen, and we'll pull up some slides, and we'll go through some of these tests. Okay, so let me move my screen around a little bit here. And let me play my slideshow here. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. I'm actually going to have to escape here for 1 second and move this around a little bit. And now we can get started. Okay, so I entitled this episode, number 74, Lab Tests You Should Know About. And as I said, I really feel this is an introductory lesson. I don't think that by the end of tonight, you're going to understand all of these tests and be able to manage them yourself. This is a general introduction for you to understand that it's very important for you to take more control over your health and not necessarily rely on your doctor. Of course, look, you need, it's good to have a doctor, obviously. I recommend having a general doctor and getting general lab tests. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of those lab tests are to try to diagnose a disease. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the focus is on improving or optimizing your health. So these are the 10 reasons why I think you should know about your labs. The first is, we all read articles all the time about the optimal diet, which diet's best for you. Pop culture, looking at number 9 of the list here is, you read one article today says that you should eat this, one article says that you should eat that, it's high carb, low carb, vegan, carnivore, you name it. As you all know, these are things that you can't get away from on social media. People talking about, oh, this is the best diet. Well, of course, all of you who have been listening to me realize that you need to find a personal diet for yourself that works. And of course, it's important for you to be able to have a general sense of how healthy you are in terms of how you feel. But unfortunately, the way modern life is, when it comes to, just as an example, when you're eating artificially sweetened foods, you have a different perception of what natural sweetness is. Also, there are all kinds of preservatives in food that are going to impact, almost putting up a little bit of a barrier between our awareness and our health. In other words, a lot of us have lost this internal sense of whether or not we're healthy or not. And unfortunately, a lot of us can't rely solely on these sort of internal feelings. A lot of people are disconnected from their body. I think we've all, you may know yourself whether or not you sort of feel like you are in your body, if you're feeling your body. A lot of people who haven't exercised a lot have a lot of disconnect when it comes to having an appreciation, a feeling, an understanding of your body. So getting back to number 1, where the reason is to know what your diet is doing to you. If you are eating a diet that you feel isn't having any kind of impact on your blood sugar, but you feel well, and then all of a sudden you get your hemoglobin A1C and it's high, well, that's telling you that you're going to need to make a specific change to your diet to be able to correct that. So the labs that you're going to be getting are not going to be perfect, of course. There's no, these are just general to cover the most important things, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to optimizing your health. The second is to understand basic physiology. And the reason is because when you have a general appreciation of what these labs are, you actually have a fairly deep sense of what's going on in your body from a physiological perspective. And while it's not going to make you understand the human body completely, it is going to give you more insight into that. The next is number 3 is the ability to set health goals with a specific outcome. It could be that you get your labs, again, using just hemoglobin A1C as an example, and you know that you need to lower it. And therefore, the specific lifestyle changes that you're going to make can be crafted around that one particular blood test. And that one particular blood test, which is an indicator of your blood sugar, your glycemic control, has enormous impacts, throughout your entire body. And you'll see that as we speak about some of these labs. The next is that you're going to gain confidence that you have more control than you think you have. We are often, patients are often kept in the dark, when it comes to understanding the things that have specific impacts on their health. Or, as I said before, generally speaking, we go to your primary care doctor, and it's really a question of diagnosing a disease or not. And and in this case, when you have a little bit more information about, as an example, your glycemic control, your blood sugar control, you have a lot more confidence. And if you've done something, you've made a lifestyle change, and you've seen the impact, this gives an enormous amount of confidence to you. In fact, when I think about the patients who've really turned around and made substantial life changes that have impacted not only themselves, but the people around them, it's almost always, it's like an aha moment when people have a feeling that they understand some lifestyle changes that they can make that show up in their blood work. And that can be a turning point. It can be, as I said, that aha moment where you start to realize that, yeah, you got this. You understand that there are things you can do in your general life that are going to impact and are measurable when it comes to things. Now, I've spoken about how important body metric analysis is, body composition analysis. I think, if I had to add something to tonight's class, I would add that we have to have an understanding of our body composition. And there are so many ways of doing that. But of course, understanding your body fat percentage is really going to be important as you get older, quite frankly, at any age. But we've spoken about before how, your muscles, as you get older, are slowly becoming a little bit more fat. And so it is important for you to have, in addition to some of the lab tests we're speaking about, to have a general understanding of what your body composition is, whether that's buying a body fat scale. We've spoken about in the osteoporosis lecture how DEXA scan, which is a very common scan for bone density, can also be a really good thing for you to go and get on your own, just to get your body fat percentage. It's very inexpensive, and you can order these tests on your own. And this is one of the biggest things, I think, one of the greatest changes that we've seen in the United States when it comes to overall health. And that is your ability to go and get labs yourself. Quest, LabCorp both have services where you can order your own lab tests. And all I can say is that there is often resistance for people to go and order a blood test on their own. But once you do it once, you develop a little bit of comfort doing that. Some people don't have any difficulty, but many of us who grew up with good relationships with our doctors, where we could go to our doctor and either ask them for a blood test, or unfortunately we would rely on them. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. We do want to rely on our doctors, but maybe we don't necessarily rely on them 100%, in the sense that we do need to have some understanding of what's happening in our bodies on our own, beyond just the diagnosis of a disease. Understanding that disease diagnosis and optimal health are two different things. We've sort of spoken about this already, that yes, we want to be able to go to someone who can diagnose something that's happening if we're having trouble. But when it comes to pursuing optimal health, can't rely on the absence of disease. The absence of disease is not necessarily optimal health. Those two things can be completely different. Optimal health is where you are making lifestyle changes and you can see them and you can measure them. Hopefully you can feel them as well. And in that particular case, having lab tests are going to be really important. I truly believe that in the next 20 years, the ability to get lab tests is going to really become very widespread. And what I'm describing to you tonight, which may sound advanced for the lay person to work with, I truly believe in the next 20 years is just going to be routine, that people are going to be interested in not just falling into reference ranges, but to optimize themselves, optimize their health, so that they can be the best that they can be. They can be a support for themselves and for their families, to be a resource, and really to, as I say all the time, become your own authority which is sort of what I have always said is our birthright. Our ability to make decisions for ourselves is one of the highest. As I said, I think it's your birthright, and it's your ability. You should claim that for yourself. And one of the ways you do that is having some more control over what's going on with your blood work. 6 is getting over the feeling that you need to rely on your doctor for everything. Of course, it's good to have, of course, I'm a doctor. I feel like I'm a good resource for my patients to make diagnoses. And I know that they rely on me, but ultimately there are things above and beyond that people need to take care of for themselves. And so having some understanding of some of these labs is going to be important. Next is getting better treatment from your doctor. I can tell you that when you can speak a little bit more educated about just giving you an example of a lab test, it really whips your doctor into shape. I can tell you that. Unfortunately, you would expect that a physician is going to treat everyone the same, but the truth of the matter is the doctors are busy, and they may not explain everything that they should. However, if you go, although there's nothing wrong with being difficult either, especially when it comes to your overall health. But that being said, being able to have a somewhat educated discussion about labs and optimal values is really going to put your doctor, on alert, in the sense that they better know what the hell they're talking about. The doctor. I know this may sound a little bit strange, but again, going through medical education and following a lot of doctors throughout the years, patients that are a little bit difficult, patients that know a fair amount, patients that ask questions and ask for things are really going to, by default, be treated by the physician in a different way with a lot more care. And those are just the facts. And so therefore, you can always order, as an example with labs, you can always order these labs yourself. However, you can certainly talk to your doctor about them. The point, of course, I'm trying to make is that having a little bit more knowledge about certain things does yield better treatment from your physician. Next is becoming a resource for the people around you. When you have a general understanding of some of these lab tests, and again, this is just an introductory class, you become a resource, and you feel like you can take better care of the people around you, your loved ones, and people will come to you as well when you show that you are proactive about your health. Number 9 is the ability to discard a lot of the pop news on diet and health. I can't tell you how often, you go onto whatever, Facebook or whatever the social media thing that you go into, and someone posts some article from, the New York Times or whatever, some big newspaper about some sort of new health thing. And those are the worst articles, and they are never a good resource. You really have to study the articles that they're talking about. And, we spoke about something called the novelty bias in the lecture on medical biases and false thinking. And unfortunately, new things that come out, they appear to be a lot better than they actually are. So new things, this will allow you to have a little bit more of confidence, as I said in number 4, that, you're going in the right direction. You're under glycemic control. Your heart disease rates are going to be less because of some of the tests that we're going to be talking about. And 10 is discovering new resources for your health, because once you start on this path of taking more control over your health for yourself, ultimately what happens is you start to discover new resources for yourself and for your overall health. So don't get scared. These are the top 10 tests, and we're going to go through all of these briefly. And again, as I said, this really is focused, tonight's class, on just giving you an introduction to these tests. And this is not a comprehensive test, not a comprehensive review. What I would like for you to get out of this, of course, this is going to be recorded. It's on my YouTube channel, and which is YouTube youtube.com/jcarpmd. You can go back to it. And I consider this sort of a point of departure. I think that these are tests that everyone should be aware of. Some of these you don't necessarily have to repeat ever again. Just knowing it once is going to be enough. I'll talk about that in a moment. Some of these interact with everything. Hemoglobin A1C is an indicator of glycemic control, but also has impacts on inflammation and heart disease. So we'll talk about how there's some that interact with each other. And some of these are going to provide more information than about your risk, about certain things that are above and beyond what you would get from just your general, say, lipid panel with cholesterol and LDL, et cetera. So let's jump right into it. These are the 10. There are others, of course, I could add, but I really believe that these are ones that really you should know about. So hemoglobin A1C, it almost comes up every week, just about. Came up last week when we spoke about Alzheimer's disease. It comes up almost every single time. And what it is glycated hemoglobin, which basically means when sugar is binding to protein. And it gives you a rough indicator of your blood sugar over the last 2 or 3 months. And it's basically your blood sugar bound to your hemoglobin, your red blood cell. And so it's giving you this average indicator of what your blood sugar is. Now, the reference ranges are 4.8 to 5.6. And ideally, you want to have it less than 5. We've spoken about what those levels, in the pre-diabetes lecture, we spoke about different levels. Again, we're speaking mostly about optimal health here. And again, we've spoken about how this is blood sugar related. So things like sleep are going to have an impact. We've spoken about how sleep, just missing one night of sleep, can impact your blood sugar for 48 hours, just one night of missed sleep. Stress is going to do the same thing. When your stress hormones release in your body, your blood sugar goes up in response. So stress is going to be important. Of course, diet. And this is, if your blood sugar is high, then there's a whole host of lifestyle strategies that we've gone through, many, many times over the years. It's been more than a year, about having some impact on hemoglobin A1C. So I don't want to go through all the impacts when it comes to all the things that you can do, or else this one thing we could spend an entire hour on. I want to give this broad overview of blood tests that I really think that you should know. And of course, I hope all of you know that most of, if you go to LabCorp or Quest, most of them, well, they both have online portals that you can pull your lab tests up at any time. As I said, they also have the ability for you to order your own tests. And there are other companies like Any Labs Now that have little places all over the country where you can just walk in and order whatever lab test you want. And so that's that. All right, so that's hemoglobin A1C. I'm just going to make a little change here. Hold on one moment while I move some things around on my screen. Give me a moment. Okay, so HSCRP, this is a general indicator of inflammation. And now I don't expect any of you to remember any of these lab tests. These are things you can always look up. One good resource is Life Extension Foundation, you can order labs from them as well. And what's really nice about the Life Extension Foundation is that they also have people who can go through the blood tests with you. So if you order these tests for yourself, you are not on your own. They, of course, they sell a lot of supplements, so they're certainly going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the supplements that are going to help some of these things, but they will also talk about lifestyle strategies to be able to help with this. Now, HSCRP high levels is associated with an increase in heart disease and in heart attack risk. And so you want to have it as low as possible. And being a general indicator of inflammation, it's fabulous because there are lots of blood tests that one could say go up with with general inflammation of the body, which of course we've spoken about many, many times. But this one is a blood test that you can get to see what your overall inflammation is. If you're, at an average risk or high risk, then you really need to start working. Meaning you got to get your diet, exercise, if you're smoking or you're exposed to chemicals or whatever the case may be, statin therapy and improving glycemic control. So believe it or not, as I said, if you work on getting that hemoglobin A1C down, often your HSCRP can also go down. So all of these things, not all of them, but many of them interact one with the other. And therefore, it really is important for you to have a general understanding of HSCRP. Next is apolipoprotein B. Now, many of you may have not have heard of any of these tests. Now, apolipoprotein B is a test that you can basically get that is going to give you more information on your cholesterol. And there have been many reports about how, of course, if your cholesterol is high, you need to work on that. But if your cholesterol is high, if your cholesterol, let's give an example. If your cholesterol is normal and your apolipoprotein B is high, you are at a higher risk by 60, I think it's like 60% higher risk for heart disease. If your cholesterol, your lipid panel is bad and your apolipoprotein B is high, your risk is even greater. It's like 160% increase. So having this gives you another indicator of your heart disease risk, even if it may have been missed just by having normal lipids on your lipid panel. So as time goes by, there's no question that the blood tests are going to refine themselves in such a way that the risk is going to be able to be determined a lot more. Some people are getting certain cholesterol where you can see how big the cholesterol particle is. That's one thing that I probably, I do recommend it. But just for general screening, apolipoprotein B is really important. And this is a protein that is on the LDL. And there are things you can do. There are, walnuts, fish oil, cruciferous vegetables. All these things are going to help lower apolipoprotein B. And this is something you can follow. And most likely, usually what happens is as people go on lifestyle strategies to reduce their lipids and their apolipoprotein, they've reduced their apolipoprotein B, usually everything else gets improved. It's, of course, increased by sugar, which is another one of those things that glycemic control is your number one thing that you really should be focusing on as much as you can is, just get rid of sugar, get rid of processed sugar. Poor sleep, poor thyroid function as well. These are all going to have an impact. Therefore, it is important for you to have your thyroid checked on a yearly basis. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So basically what let's keep on going. And now next is lipoprotein A. And lipoprotein A is a test that actually you don't have to get more than once in your life. And it's genetically determined. And if you have a high level of lipoprotein A, then you have a higher risk for heart disease. And ultimately, a lot still to this day, a lot of doctors do not get a lipoprotein A because they feel like, well, there's nothing you can do about it. So what's the point of knowing? I think it's important for you to know. If you have a high lipoprotein A, you have a very substantial risk for heart disease. There are things that will lower it a little bit, like niacin and aspirin, fish oil, CoQ10. Some people take carnitine. There are supplements that can lower it a little bit, and there are some medications that are undergoing studies currently that are very, very hopeful. But ultimately, if you have lipoprotein A and it's reasonably high, then at that point, it's actually important for you to consider getting something like a CIMT test, which is where they check your carotid artery, an ultrasound of your carotid artery, or you can go locally and just get basically a heart scan. These heart scans are very inexpensive, believe it or not. You can get them for $150 at usually at a local university, and it's often done in the setting of an integrative cardiology center. And of course, this is something that they use to partly as a service, and also, of course, to get to find patients for the clinic. Nonetheless, it's an integrative, or I should say, preventative cardiology programs that do this, which means that this is something that you can follow over time, and you can implement other strategies to make sure your risk is as low as possible. But to just say that I'm not going to get it because I don't feel like there's anything to do about it really I think, is a disservice. And now that we're learning so much about this value, lipoprotein A, I think it's important for everyone, given that heart disease is still obviously a very substantial cause of disease and mortality. You should know, and therefore you can optimize everything else about yourself to lower the risk as much as possible. So I think it's quite important. Next is your fasting insulin level. Now, we all know, because this is another one of those things that I've spoken about so many times over the years, and that is that if your insulin level is high, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for you to lose weight, because when your insulin level is high, you are unable to break down fat. There's an enzyme that gets inhibited that prevents you from breaking down fat when your insulin level is high. And so insulin level goes high in response, of course, to high blood sugar. It also goes high in response to a lot of animal protein as well. But the main factor is poor glycemic control. So it's not uncommon, although it's not uncommon to have a high hemoglobin A1C and a high fasting insulin, but you can have a normal hemoglobin A1C and a high fasting insulin, because there's so many other things that are involved with insulin. And if your insulin level is good, then oftentimes your ability to lose weight is going to be good. And if you're having trouble losing weight and you get a fasting insulin level high, then you have an endpoint to work on. You have an endpoint to work on to get your insulin level down, such that when you get that down, oftentimes you'll be able to see your weight go down. So obviously less sugar. We've spoken, if you're eating animal protein at every meal, that's going to be a problem. Processed grains, things that are ground up into fine flours, are going to be a problem. And of course, exercise and a vinegar can actually help with blood sugar as well. Portion sizes, general weight loss is going to help as well. Of course, there's issues with insulin sensitivity, where insulin level continues to go up. So there's a whole host of things, of course, that we could discuss, that I have discussed over the years. But ultimately, if you have a fasting insulin level, then at that point that is high, at that point, you should look into what are the lifestyle strategies to lower insulin. Of course, you can reach out to me, but there are going to be lots of resources for that if you do your research. Next is vitamin D. Now, we've spoken about vitamin D as well over the years. Again, the reference ranges range from 30 to 100, but your optimal range is somewhere 40 to 80. Most people say 50 to 80. I think if you have around 40 and up, generally it's okay. And quite frankly, if you need more, you just you take more. Most people need around 4,000 to 5,000 international units a day to be able to maintain these levels. And everyone should know what their vitamin D level is. It is good, obviously, for bone and immune health, but there's so many other things. I mean, you could have a whole, there are conferences just on vitamin D. Of course, there is impacts with the pandemic that we're in. There are studies to show that people who have higher vitamin D levels do much better if they get COVID. And so it's hard to say whether taking vitamin D to raise your level is going to yield the same results, but certainly you want to have a normal level. And therefore, if you need more, just take more. When it comes to taking vitamin D, it's important to get it in a gel cap, not a dry cap, because there are issues with absorption of the dry cap. So just to start off, you want to make sure it's a gel cap. Again, we're doing a very cursory level here. ApoE4, we spoke about this last week, and this is an Alzheimer's risk gene. And your doctor, often doctors don't order it because they don't think there's anything that you can do about it. But if you watched last week's class, you realize that there's been a substantial amount of work done that has shown that if you have an increased risk or you're developing early signs of dementia, there are things that you can do for that to dramatically reduce the risk. So if you have 0 copies, your risk is 9% of Alzheimer's. If you have 1 copy, you have a 30% risk. And if you have 2 copies, your risk can be up to 90% of having Alzheimer's disease. And if that would be a sobering thing, if you have it, but it's also empowering. You really need to look at it from that perspective, because now we know that there are lifestyle strategies that can be done that can substantially reduce your risk, if not completely reverse it. Now that requires a little bit of work on your part, which means reading some resources, contacting some experts. But the first place you would start is to look at the work of Dale Bredesen. First of all, watch my class from last week, which will give you all the resources and hopefully the confidence to realize that if you happen to have this, it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's disease, even with a 90% risk. That 90% risk is for people who are not going to do anything, who are metabolically unhealthy, and this is going to contribute to the risk, because there are various things that go along with ApoE4. It's generally a indicator, also an indicator somewhat of inflammation, genetic marker. And the question, of course, is always, we spoke about this last week, why on earth would a large percentage of the population have either 1 or 2 copies of a gene that causes inflammation? And the answer is that when we were living in a dirty environment and living in the jungle and this sort of thing, inflammation has a role in fighting infection, preventing, allowing you to mount an inflammatory response if you have an injury, which is going to help the healing process. And so there was a genetic advantage at one point, but now we live in an environment that is generally clean, and we don't. And this sort of evolutionary advantage back, thousands and millions of years ago, is going to have a negative impact for us in the lifestyle that we have now. And if we compound that with poor glycemic control, and high insulin levels, and for people who have ApoE4 gene, they absorb a lot of fat as well. So they have to watch their saturated fat intake, because their cholesterol can go sky high. So there are all these things that we know now, how to mitigate these risk factors in such a way that your risk is not there. And quite frankly, most of you, if you ask your doctor to get ApoE4, some of them may not even know what it is, and many will be resistant for, they might not even know how to order it. You can get this, you can order it on your own, as I said. So I think everyone should know what their ApoE4 gene is. Thyroid panel, you should have an understanding of that, because thyroid panel, if your thyroid is off, your lipoprotein A, that level we spoke about, can be off. And the optimal ranges are really different than the reference ranges. As you can see, just thinking of the TSH, 0.45 to 4.5, but your optimal range is 1 to 2. So when I talk about thyroid and hormones, it's a complicated topic. And for this, I really truly believe you do need to work with a physician. And so therefore, this is one of those situations where it's important to, of course, you can do your own research, no question about it. But I believe that when it comes to hormonal issues, it's worth trying to find a good resource for that. So we're not going to spend a lot of detail on thyroid, but you do want to make sure that each year that you're getting a thyroid panel that includes, a T3, a T4, a free T4, a TSH. Again, this is all going to be recorded, but you can go back and look at this, but there are plenty of resources that you can use for this. I'm just going to make a, hold on one moment. Darlene's asking if I'll provide all of this in a document that we can print. I can, sure. I will put a link on the YouTube channel underneath in the description that you can download the presentation. And Steve is asking that as well. I think, Steve is asking, can we download the recommended blood tests to take to our primary care doctor? And the answer is yes. Just be prepared that they may not do it for you. And, the ApoE4 might not be covered by insurance. They just might not order it. And so therefore you have to be prepared. A lot of doctors haven't ordered, say, a fasting insulin level. And so when you're asking the doctor to order something that they've never ordered before, they can become very uncomfortable and resistant depending on the doctor that you have. So I would just be cautious with that. And if they say no or whatever, just really don't worry about it and just get it yourself. Okay. Let me move the screen around a little bit. Sorry. Can you see the screen right now fully? If you could just type that into the chat box. Okay, great. So in that case, I'll just, okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, so we spoke, let me just make my screen a little bigger here. And none of these tests are prohibitively costly, no. They're not, no. When it comes to, none of them are prohibitively costly, no. Okay, so we spoke about thyroid. Men's health, so you want to have a general male hormone panel done once a year. And again, this is one of those hormonal things, and therefore I truly believe it's best to work with a forward-thinking endocrinologist to look at these tests. There's a lot of debate about, hormone replacement, and you really need to have a good connection with someone who will be supportive of you and explain, you don't want to necessarily go to someone who just does hormone replacement unless that's something you've convinced yourself that you need to do. It's somewhat complicated, but nonetheless, you do want to know, you want to have a snapshot of what's going on. Women's health, these are some of the tests that are usually included in that. And just as an example, we've spoken about sex hormone binding globulin, and this is basically a protein in the blood that binds and therefore prevents certain of these hormones from being active. And there are lots of things in terms of lifestyle that poor lifestyle can raise this to such a point that the testosterone is not free in the blood to be able to do what it's supposed to do. And so my point basically is that if your testosterone, if this is a little bit off, there are lifestyle things you can do without having to go to hormone replacement. So that's the biggest thing. Here's some things about women's health. And last week we spoke about pregnenolone because, quite frankly, a lot of anti-aging doctors that I know take pregnenolone, sort of like the mother of hormones. It's like the one that drops, and certainly I know a fair number of doctors who do. I'm not recommending you take pregnenolone, but it is something that decreases with age, and there are a fair number of anti-aging doctors who take that. Okay, and then finally is your omega index. And the reason I like the omega index is because it gives you it's another inflammation marker. Now, I think all of you hopefully remember that HSCRP, that one for sure. Steve, just thinking about this since you asked the question, let's just go back to here. So hemoglobin A1C, your doctor should already be checking that. No question about it. Many doctors do check HSCRP because there was a big study 6-7 years ago that basically showed that this particular blood test is a good indicator for heart disease risk in certain patients, and therefore it's somewhat popular, HSCRP. The point being, however, is that a lot of the doctors are ordering it just for its risk factor for heart disease, when I'm stressing to you that it's a general indicator of inflammation, and you really need to look at your overall health to work on that. Apolipoprotein B is becoming more popular, and so I don't think your doctor will have a problem with that. Lipoprotein A, maybe not. Insulin level, a fasting insulin level. They may not have ordered it before if they're just a GP, but it's not that expensive, and so I don't think there'll be a problem. Certainly, vitamin D shouldn't be a problem. Thyroid panel, hormone panel, ApoE4. There might be some resistance, mainly because they might not know how to order it, but maybe they will. Again, it really depends on the doctor. Omega index is often a finger stick, but there are labs that'll do it by blood as well. So generally looking at these, I don't think you'll have all that much resistance. So for sure, you could hand them this list and say, I want to do that. Okay, so let's go back to the omega index, and then we'll call it a night. So I like the omega index. It's also a general indicator of inflammation, and you want 8 to 12%. But what I really like about the new omega index is that it also tells you about your trans fat. Trans fat is something that's sometimes hidden in baked goods and has an incredibly high risk for heart disease when you have a lot of trans fat. And sometimes people who maybe feel like they are eating really cleanly, there might be a hidden source of trans fat, and just having a little bit of trans fat raises the risk of heart disease. So much so that certain cities have actually put a ban on trans fat and have been able to calculate, just by the ban that so many lives have been saved. That's how problematic trans fat is. Then you get the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. And if this ratio is off, it's generally an indicator of inflammation, but also the fact that your fat consumption is off in the sense of the ratio of fat. So things like seed oils are very, very high in omega-6s to omega-3s. And, hundreds of years ago, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was much lower than it is now. It used to be like, 3 to 1. That's sort of the estimate. Now it's like 20 to 40 to 1 because of this proliferation of seed oils, corn oil, sunflower, safflower, all these things, which unfortunately, not only are they almost always rancid, but you get so much of these that can create an inflammatory situation in your body. The other ratios, this is arachidonic acid, which can be inflammatory. EPA is a type of omega-3 fat. So this gives you a little bit more of a refined ratio. And then of course, tells you your omega-3, omega-6, and also gives you some information on the different types of fats. So I really like that test. And I really believe that there have been some people who've come out and said they don't feel like it is a good indicator, but I can tell you that having ordered enough of these and knowing enough of the patients that that it tends to be understanding sort of their lifestyle, it tends to make sense when we sort of look at the blood test and see those results. Okay, so that is really what I wanted to cover. Again, I really believe that this is just very introductory, but can be incredibly powering as a further indicator of your overall health. And I hope that, my wish for you is that you take more control over your health, not be scared. I know Steve's going to go in and ask his doctor, and I encourage all of you, at the very least, I really believe that you get all of these. Again, the lipoprotein A and the ApoE4, you only have to get generally once. But then at that point, when you get some of these, it really leads you to very specific lifestyle interventions that, of course, you have to look into. And you can always reach out to me if you have any questions, but I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's class. And next week, we're going to be talking about fatty liver disease. And fatty liver disease it's like 1 in 3 people in the United States has fatty liver disease. And we're going to talk about that. Not one of the reasons I like to highlight certain diseases is not necessarily because I want to talk about that particular disease. The reason I like to look at a particular disease, especially one that is an epidemic, is that it gives us a deeper understanding of really what's going on with our modern lifestyle. It gives us a lens to look at the human body through a specific condition. In this case, looking at your overall health through the perspective of the liver and what can happen to it with our modern lifestyle. And therefore, whether you know someone who has fatty liver disease, and you certainly do with so many people having it, but regardless of the situation, it gives you a lens, as I said, to look at the overall health of the body by understanding the liver from a different perspective. It gives you a better understanding of basic physiology, and it gives you a better understanding of how modern lifestyle is going to impact us on a very specific way. So thank you, everyone, for your attention tonight. And again, as always, I appreciate everyone for coming on tonight. And I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's class. I wish everyone good health. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week on the class next week. Okay, hope everyone stays well, and see you next week.